Welcome back, everyone, to another One Piece video today. Today we'll be talking about the theories that we've got surrounding about Queen Condell of the Hesperian Kingdom, Gunko's mom, as well as some more info about the Hesperia Kingdom, as well as just general theories and how we think this flashback is going to go down, all right? But before we begin, please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. I'm a small new channel, and any help goes a long way against the algorithm, and let's get into it, all right? So this chapter basically kind of like, before I begin, okay, let's break down how long I think this flashback will last, okay? I'm of the opinion that this flashback with Brook, Gunko, and everything that's happening is going to be about 5 to 6 chapters, okay? We just had a 19 chapter flashback with Harold's flashback, which spawned into Loki's flashback, which spawned into the scene with Rocks, and then Harold and Loki again. It reminds me of that one scene in Back to the Future. You guys know about Back to the Future, right? We all love Back to the Future, okay? That scene in Back to the Future Part 2 when Marty rushes to see Doc after he's been stranded back in the 1950s. He gets a letter saying, hey, I'm in the 1880s. So then he rushes to see the Doc of 1950s and he goes to him. And then he's like, Doc, Doc, Doc. And then Dr. Brown's face is just like, what the fuck? Marty, what are you doing here? I just sent you to the future. What happened? And then Marty tells him, I know, Doc. I know. I came back from the future. And Doc just immediately just passes out and faints. He's just like, I can't deal with this shit anymore, okay? That's how I'm feeling, okay? We just did the 19 chapter flashback and we're just back. We're going back in time again. We're going back even further this time, okay? We're going back 70 years, okay? Well, actually, no. King Harold was actually about over 100 years before King Harold when he started the flashback, so not as far, but still, okay? Now, I don't think it'll be 19 chapters. I think 5 or 6 is probably the cutoff point, because remember, the way One Piece flashbacks work, particularly Straw Hats, there's the part where everything's good and happy, all cheerful and happy, and then there's the just proverbial roller coaster ride at the bottom when it just like drops, okay, real fast. So that's got me thinking, like, okay, how is this flashback going to start? How is it going to go on? And what are the major plot points we're going to see with Queen Condell, Gunko, her dad, the king, okay? And so I also wanted to bring in some theories that I think about Queen Condell that might explain how it all got to this point, okay? So first thing about the Hesperia Kingdom. I missed this in the review. I'll bring it up again, okay? The word Hesperia is the Italian version for Hesperia, okay? That's the term the Greeks used for Western lands when they refer to the Italian peninsula. The Italians, in turn, use this when they called it Hesperia, when they were referring to the lands west of them, which is basically Spain. And so that's just the reference Oda's going for. And so Hesperia could basically mean the Western lands, okay? And so what does that essentially means? Well, it's in the West Blue. We can figure it out from there. It's also basically representing places like, say, Salzburg, which was the home of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. And so that just lines up perfectly with Brook being from Austria. We already knew this. And so some other things I kind of wanted to bring up was like, okay, remember when Gunko was first revealed, okay, way back in the beginning of Elbaph, okay? In fact, a couple episodes from now in the anime. It doesn't say what her celestial dragon's last name is. It never says that. Okay? It never says that. And so that got me theorizing, like, okay, so is she adopted? Was she in the beginning? Oda later corrected it in the volume edition. She's from the Myanmar family. We know this, okay? We know that she was in Imu's flower room, all right? 56 years ago with Rocks. 38 years ago, she was at God Valley during the native hunting competition. All right? She was there. So that got me thinking, okay, Queen Condell, if you see her outfit, and yes, she looks like Olivia Armstrong. I know she does. She looks like Olivia Armstrong. I can see it too. I know it. She does. But that got me thinking, like, okay, what exactly is she wearing that kind of outfit? Because we only seen one type of people wearing an outfit like that. God's Knights. And so that got me thinking, okay, has there ever been God's Knights that go on extended missions for years at a time, return with children? There's only one person that meets that quote, okay? Garling. So that got me theorizing, okay, so Queen Condell is a member of the Myanmar family, and she was a member of the God's Knights, and she was sent to infiltrate Hesperia Kingdom, or she was on a mission. Now, we don't know how long this mission would be. Maybe she didn't tell Imu or any of the higher ups about what she was doing. Maybe she would just practically come and go. We don't know, but she was a member of the kingdom's army, and she rose through the ranks, okay? So that got me thinking, like, okay, so then she's a member of the Myanmar family, okay? And then she was sent on a mission to infiltrate this non-affiliated country. That could have been Asperia. And then she basically was tasked to climb the ranks to gain favor of the royal family and convince them to join the world government. Then you see what happens in the Asperia kingdom, where she basically falls in love with the king, marries him, has his kid, and she begins to have a sudden change of heart, essentially, when it comes to Queen Condell and everything she was dealing with. Because remember, okay, this kind of gives me some Viltrumite vibes, okay? Omni-Man coming to Earth, or what's going to happen in later series, spoilers, but the Viltrumites basically really love Earthlings, okay? So Queen Condell essentially was tasked to infiltrate the Asperia kingdom, okay? And she basically climbed the ranks, gained royal favor, married into the royal family, but she never followed through on her mission, okay? And so that got me thinking, like, okay, she was sent on this mission to infiltrate the family and bring them into the fold. She didn't do that. And so she obviously, somebody's getting caught. Remember, once you become a member of the God's Knights, okay, you are marked with the Deep Sea Covenant. When you have the Deep Sea Covenant level 2, you are basically under Emu's thumb 24/7. You can't resist him, okay? And so that got me thinking, like, okay, was she basically go doing her mission? Because if she's doing this, that means she's not a member of level 2. She's just a regular devoted blade of God, Mark 1, okay? And that means that she's essentially, like, you know, only susceptible to Emu's commands in Marijua, in the Holy Land, okay? So that means she was sent on a mission, and so that means she moved through the ranks, but she had a change of heart, and she didn't want to bring them in the fold, okay? Because we know this, okay? Shuri, aka Gunko, allegedly murdered her father, Brook's benefactor, okay? And so how is this going to go down? How is this just going to all line up? Because my headcanon is what Brook said. She was taken to the Marijua, and that's that. That was the end of it, okay? And so was Queen Condell summoned back to Marijua? Did she says, oh, yeah, I'm still working on the mission. And then Emu was like, no, you're not. And then forces her to do something, bring her daughter. And then she's forced to obey the commands of the Celestial Dragons and hand her daughter over. And Gunko allegedly murders her father. We don't know what happens on that day, but we do know we see her crying out, Father. We see tears, either hers or her mom's. We don't know who. But we still haven't seen all the pieces play out and how this is going to work out. Because remember, Gunko still has a subconscious memory. She still remembers Brook on a subconscious level. Because remember, during her introduction, she was a big fan of Brook's music, and she wanted Brook as her slave to make music for her. So on a subconscious level, Gunko still remembers Brook. And then once she was able to regain some of her memories, she immediately recognized, oh shit, Brook, you got to run away, leave, flee, move. And so that got me thinking, like, okay, how is this going to go down? How is this going to all play out? Well, in all honesty, I personally think the flashback is going to start off, obviously, we're going to have the good times with Queen Condell. We're going to learn more about her in the next chapter. We're going to see the absolute peak that was the Asperia Kingdom. Because remember, this country does no longer exist anymore, okay? It's gone. It doesn't exist anymore, okay? That's what Brook said. So something's going to happen to have this kingdom be wiped off the map, okay? Is it going to be dogpiled, invaded by other countries that are allied with the world government? Since they refuse to join, they basically are open season for the other islands to attack and just strip them of their resources. Maybe that could happen. And so we see this happen. And that got me thinking, like, okay, so we're going to see this happy moments with Brook, Gunko, Princess Shuri, and then Queen Condell and the King. We're going to see them all come together, just have good times. And then the end of the next chapter after that, so let's say that'd be 1183. So then 1184, 1185, we're going to have the more of the good times. But then there's going to be a tone shift. There's going to be some foreboding tragedy that's going to happen. And then 1186, we're going to see just like the absolute like stakes be raised to the lowest point. And then that's when 1187 is when the tragedy starts. And 1188, we wrap things up and we go back to the present, okay? Because here's the thing. This is 70 years ago. Brook eventually is going to become a member of the Rumbar Pirates 50 years ago. So there's going to be roughly a 20-year-ish, over 20 years ago point. And so this leads us to the point of like, okay, so how is this going to play out? How are we going to get to the point where Brook ends up with the Rumbar crew? Because remember, not only is Brook a member of the Rumbar crew, but he always wears shades and he's got a giant scar on his face, okay? So I'm betting dollars to donuts that is, whatever happens, the day Princess Shuri, aka Gunko, murders her father, that is how he gets a scar, and he's got some kind of like gash over his eye, and that's why he always wears the shades, okay, when he was alive the first time around. So this happens pretty much for all. This happens for all of the Straw Hats backstories, okay, particularly the tragic ones. We're introduced to people we love. We see the good times, and then we see the absolute tragedy that befalls them. That basically sets them up, because we know Brook has his own life before this. He lived full. He was a battle leader of a battle convoy, and we're seeing this right now. So I'm personally of the opinion that the Queen essentially was a member of the Gods Knights, and she was tasked to infiltrate, do what Garling did, but she wasn't a full member of the Celestial Dragon. She wasn't a full, like, she was a devoted blade of God. She was like the level 1, okay? And when that happens, eventually Emu and the Celestial Dragon's like, okay, you've been here for years, okay? What's going on, Kandel? Get your shit together. And then we see something happen where other Gods Knights are brought onto the scene. They're like, what are you doing, Kandel? And Kandel's like, I'm she tries to stall for time, and then they're just like, yeah, no, you're done. And then they just take Gunko back to the Holy Land along with her father, and I'm almost certain Brook has to not see it because he doesn't know any of this, but he is going to get injured, and then he's going to hear from aftermath, Princess Shuri murdered her father, okay? Or this could have happened, okay? This is another way this probably will happen, okay? We know that once people start entering into the Abyssal Sea Covenant, the Deep Sea Covenant, okay, their minds begin to get warped. They are no longer themselves. They're like, as Harold says it, they view themselves essentially as gods. And so how does this play out? How does this blink in? Okay, so eventually Gunko is going to get hit with the Abyssal Sea Covenant, okay? And Emu is basically going to be like, yeah, you're going to murder your parents. You're going to do that. Oh, and by the way, sure, Princess Shuri, Queen Kandel, yeah, you're dead to me now. All right, and that's what's going to happen, because Oda is basically setting up Emu to be like the most duplicitous person in the series, and we've seen some nasty monsters. Okay, Saturn experimenting on pregnant women, Doflamingo, and all his bullshit. We know what Orochi was doing, and literally Emu is going to force a child to basically enter into a deal with it, and then make them murder their father. Okay, that's some pretty nefarious shit that Emu's doing. Okay, so that basically be a great way of setting up how this happens. And then Brook is going to see it. He's going to get scarred, and then he's going to go out to sea, and he's going to meet. I'm almost certain we have to meet Calico Yorkie in this flashback. We have to, because the timelines sort of match up perfectly at this point. We have to see Calico Yorkie in this moment at this point in history. All right, because how else would he know Brook? All right, and remember, Oda himself admitted this. Okay, the current situation that's happening in, for example, Elgia, it sort of is inspired, not sort of, he admitted this, but he admitted that the Kingdom of Algeria from film Red, the non-canon island, there is a musical demon resting on that island that already exists in the story. And so that got me thinking, like, okay, is there a demon like Top Musica in Asperia? And that's what Emu wanted. That's why they sent Kandel to infiltrate the royal family, to climb the ranks, so that way they could get an inside person and exploit it for themselves. Possibly, we don't know, but we do know that this kingdom falls. It no longer exists anymore, okay? It's off the map. It's just soot. And so how is this all going to play out? How will all this just shape out in terms of, for example, the flashback? I think we're going to see the joys. We're going to see foreboding tragedy. We're going to see the tragedy, and then we're going to wrap it up everything in the 4th or 5th chapter. And by the end of the 4th chapter, or the big halfway through the 5th chapter, we will be cut back to the present, where Brook is done explaining things. So I personally don't believe we're going to see that long a flashback. But again, I think this flashback is basically going to cover all the joys and the tragedies. I definitely think Queen Kandel was basically a member of the Myanmar family. She wasn't a level 2 God's Knight, but she was definitely level 1, the Shallow Seas Covenant. And then she was tasked to infiltrate the kingdom. But then, she obviously had a change of heart or conscience, and she decided to just let things be, okay? And then once Emu or other God's Knights find out, they're like, nope, you're done. And then Gunko is forced to go to the Holy Land and then become basically a full God's Knight with a Deep Sea Covenant. And that's that. Because we don't know when Gunko exactly murdered her father. We know it's a few years after this, but it's probably going to be at least, I wouldn't be surprised if this happens, let's say 5, 6, 7 years from now. Gunko's like, right now she's 7, so she's like 15, okay? Let's say 8 years. and that would make Brook 28. Well, anyway, that's my thoughts on the potential for the Brook Flashback and how it's going to go down. I'm your boy Malik. Take care. Y'all have a wonderful day.